most daring of them all. Until every one of us.
No one goes beyond the reef.
Down by the shore. And let me know. Go inside. We were voyagers. I make, now I can't turn back. Where's my boat?
Hard to write with. To face with greatness and it's strange. Boat snack. Cup, we're here.
And you're right, this Tamatoa guy really likes his treasure. Covered in sparkly treasure.
A minute. I will gladly do so.
Hey, crab cake!
Chinese, send your arm.
At the dawn of the world, Earth was nothing but endless ocean. From that vast water rose a goddess who shaped life itself, Te Fiti. With her power, islands grew, plants bloomed, and living creatures filled the world. But peace didn't last. A demigod named Maui, famous for his shape-shifting and the enchanted fishhook that gave him that ability, tried to take Te Fiti's heart, a glowing green stone that held her creative power. The theft didn't bring glory, it unleashed ruin. Without her heart, Te Fiti's light faded, and a creeping darkness began swallowing the seas. Maui attempted to escape, but his path was blocked by a terrifying molten monster of earth and flame. The battle went badly. Maui was struck so hard he lost both the stolen heart and his treasured hook, and both disappeared beneath the waves. 1,000 years pass, and a legend becomes a story. On the peaceful island of Motunui, Grandma Tala entertains children with the ancient tale. Chief Tu'e arrives to calm the frightened kids, but his attempt backfires. He draws back the room coverings to reveal warnings and carve images of sea monsters, and the children panic even more. One child, Moana, doesn't stay to be scared. She slips away to the shoreline, drawn by something she can't explain. On the beach, she spots a tiny turtle struggling toward the water and gently clears a path for it. As she helps, the ocean itself seems to notice her. A wave rolls in with unusual purpose. The sea parts as if inviting her forward, and the water reveals something hidden, a small shell holding a brilliant green stone. The ocean toys with her like it's choosing her, styling her hair with spray and nudging her closer. But the moment her father appears, the sea retreats and everything looks ordinary again, leaving her standing on dry sand like nothing happened. Moana grows up in Motunui, surrounded by order and duty. The island runs on tradition. Everyone has a role, and Moana, being the chief's daughter, is being prepared to lead. Even as a teenager, though, she keeps turning toward the water. The sea calls to her constantly, but responsibility keeps pulling her back. She throws herself into village life anyway. She checks on food supplies, inspects the harvest, and makes practical decisions, like clearing disease plants and replacing failing crops. Still, a deeper problem spreads across the island. Fishermen return with empty nets. No matter which direction they paddle, the fish are gone. Moana argues they should sail beyond the reef to find better waters. Chief Tu'e shuts it down immediately. He won't risk lives past the barrier reef, especially not his daughters. His refusal isn't gentle, either. It stings Moana in front of everyone. Later, her mother Sina explains the real reason. Tu'e once loved the ocean too, until he crossed the reef and got caught in a brutal storm. Someone close to him was swept away, and Tu'e couldn't save him. Since then, the ocean hasn't felt like freedom to him. It's felt like a threat. Even with that warning, Moana can't let the idea go. She steals away with a canoe, determined to prove there's hope beyond the reef. Her little pig joins her at first, and she tries to steady herself, telling herself that the ocean will be different out there, that the fish must be somewhere beyond the coral wall. But the open water turns hostile fast. Wind slams the sail, waves tilt the canoe, and in the chaos the pig tumbles into the water. Moana lunges to grab it, gets thrown overboard, and a surge drags her down. Underwater, she's pinned and snagged in coral. Struggling for air, she forces herself free by smashing the grip loose and fights back to the surface, only to wash up on the beach again, scraped and exhausted. The pig is safe, but the ocean has made its point. Grandma Tala finds her and promises not to tell Chief Tu'e. Moana, shaken, almost accepts defeat. Maybe her father is right. Maybe being a leader means staying where it's safe. But Tala isn't finished. She leads Moana to a secret place, a cave hidden behind thick plants, where Motunui's past has been concealed. Inside are massive canoes, far larger than anything used on the island now. Moana touches a drum and beats it. The first time, nothing. The second, still nothing. But on the third, lights flicker across the stored boats, and Moana is hit with a vivid rush of imagery. Her ancestors racing over open water in fleets, exploring distant islands, living as voyagers, not as people confined to one shore. Moana realizes the truth. Her people weren't always afraid of the sea. They were born to travel it. Tala explains why that stopped. After Maui's mistake, darkness spread, monsters rose, and sailing became deadly. To protect the island, the chiefs banned long voyages. Over time, the ban became tradition, and tradition became a cage. Now the same darkness that once followed Te Whiti's missing heart is creeping closer again, and even the fish have begun to vanish. Tala shows Moana the sign of it, black, corrupted growth spreading like roots through the land and water. Then she reveals what she's been holding on to, Te Whiti's heart, the glowing green stone. Tala places it in Moana's hands and tells her the ocean didn't choose randomly. Someone has to cross the sea, find Maui, and return the heart to restore balance. As if to confirm Tala's words, the water itself rises and swirls around Moana, alive, responsive, almost protective. Moana runs to her father during a village meeting and begs him to listen. She can help everyone if she sails out and fixes what's happening. Tue refuses with fury. He orders the boats destroyed and throws the green stone down outside, as if breaking the symbol will break the destiny attached to it. Before Moana can argue again, she's called to Tala's hut. Grandma has fallen suddenly ill. Moana sits close as Tala weakens, and the old woman speaks softly, urgently. She tells Moana to follow the ocean, to find Maui, and to remember who she is. Then she presses a necklace into Moana's hands, the heart secured inside it, and with her final strength pushes her granddaughter toward the path she knows she must take. That night, Moana returns to the hidden cave, chooses one of the ancestral boats, and sets out across the sea, alone, determined, and finally moving toward the horizon her people once claimed. A moment later, the ocean glows, and a radiant stingray-shaped light glides beneath the surface, circling Moana's canoe like a silent guide. It swims ahead, cutting through the waves as if showing her the way. A towering swell rises in front of her, but instead of smashing her, it lifts the canoe and gently carries her over. As Moana adjusts her course, she hears frantic rustling from inside the boat. She pries open a small storage space and finds an unexpected stowaway. Hey, the village rooster, wedged into a compartment like he's been there the whole time. The second the bird understands it's surrounded by endless water, it loses its mind, flapping, screeching, and diving straight overboard. Moana lunges after him without thinking, then whips around in panic when she realizes her canoe is drifting away. She hauls herself back aboard just in time, grabs the rooster, and traps him in a makeshift pen so he can't jump out again. By dusk, the ocean grows restless. Moana's eyelids get heavy, and she nods off at the oar. A cool splash taps her shoulder, almost like a gentle slap, and she jolts awake. Something's wrong. She's drifting off course. The wind abruptly swings the canoe around, and in the scramble, she's knocked into the sea. The sky turns vicious. A storm rolls in fast, swallowing the horizon. Moana clings to broken boards as the canoe snaps apart, but a massive wave crashes down and everything goes black. When she opens her eyes the next morning, she's sprawled on a strange beach, half buried in sand. The green heartstone is still with her, but her boat is wrecked beyond repair. As she stumbles upright, she notices carved symbols on nearby rocks, bold markings that match the stories. Maui has been here. The ocean seems to warn her someone is coming. Moana scoops up hey and ducks behind the wreckage. Seconds later, a man bursts into view with dramatic shouting, like he's making a grand entrance for an audience that isn't there. He freezes when he spots her. Then, with ridiculous confidence, he lifts the heavy canoe with one hand, scribbles a signature on Moana's or like it's a fan request, and grins. It's Maui. Moana doesn't back down. She smacks him, demanding help. Maui immediately starts bragging about islands he discovered, monsters he defeated, and how the world basically owes him everything. While he talks, he slips into his favorite trick, distraction. Before Moana can stop him, he shoves her into a cave and blocks the exit. Inside, Moana finds a giant statue of Maui. Of course, there's a statue of him. She climbs it, shoves it over with all her weight, and uses the impact to open a gap near the ceiling. She squeezes through and escapes, just in time to see Maui already sailing away in her canoe. Moana charges after him, leaps from higher ground to land on the boat, misses by inches, and splashes into the ocean. But the sea doesn't abandon her. It rockets her forward like a living slingshot and drops her back onto the canoe. Maui throws her off again. The ocean launches her back again. He tosses her again. It turns into a ridiculous back and forth, Maui versus the sea, until Moana finally flashes Te Whiti's heart. Maui's mood shifts. He snatches the glowing stone and hurls it into the water, hoping that ends the argument. Instantly, the ocean spits it right back into Moana's hands like nice try. Maui tries to bolt. The ocean responds by yanking him off the canoe and dumping him over the side. Furious and soaked, he snaps that the heart is cursed, that stealing it cost him everything. He lost his status, his pride, and most importantly, his magical hook. Before Moana can press him further, a dart whistles past and nearly nails Hei. Moana turns, only to spot a bizarre threat. The Kakamora, coconut-armored raiders, swarming across the sea on a massive cobbled-together ship. Maui mutters that he can't fight without his hook. No hook means no shape-shifting, no real power. The Kakamora launch cables that latch onto Moana's canoe and start dragging it like a capture prize. Their giant vessel splits into multiple sections to box them in, and the little coconut warriors zip across ropes toward the canoe. In the chaos, Moana nearly loses the heart. Except Hei panics, gulps it down, and immediately becomes the worst possible target. A Kakamora snatches the rooster and retreats to their ship. Moana races after them, furious. Maui spins the canoe hard, trying to escape, but Moana digs in her, or climbs onto the enemy ship anyway, and fights her way through the chaos. Darts fly. She ducks, swings her, or like a staff, and shoves attackers aside as she scrambles upward. At the top, she finds Hei and yanks him free. Then she grabs a rope, plants her, or as a brace, and slides back down toward her canoe in a controlled drop, barely making it as the Kakamora ships close in, trying to crush the canoe between them. At the last second, Moana and Maui slip through a narrow gap and burst into open water. Afterward, with adrenaline fading, their argument returns. Maui insists that if they're doing anything, it starts with retrieving his hook. Moana fires back that he's remembered less as a hero and more as the one who started all this by stealing the heart. She tells him the truth. Returning it is his chance to become the hero he claims to be. Maui agrees, but on his terms. He'll help restore the heart only if they get his hook first. He still dismisses Moana, saying she's not built for this kind of journey. The ocean answers by flicking a stray tranquilizer dart straight into him, knocking him out cold. With no choice and no pride left to protect, Maui ends up teaching Moana the basics of sailing, because now she's the one who has to keep them moving. That night, Moana has a nightmare. She sees Motunui choking under spreading darkness, trees turning gray and crumbling, her parents on the shore calling out as the black cloud smothers the world. She jolts awake, safe on the ocean. Maui is up again, steering the canoe as if nothing happened. Soon they reach a gloomy island at the edge of danger, the place Maui calls the realm of monsters, where his hook was taken. He tells Moana she's staying behind, but when he climbs the jagged rocks, he realizes she followed him anyway. At the summit, there's no obvious entrance, just stone. Maui pretends the doorway only appears when a human sacrifice is offered, clearly trying to scare her into leaving. Then he admits he's messing with her. With a dramatic stomp and a burst of dust, a circular marking on the rock becomes visible, like a hidden face. Maui performs a strange ritual-like dance, strikes the ground with force, and the stone responds. A passaggio-pen. And the path into the monster's domain reveals itself. Maui doesn't hesitate. The instant the hidden passage opens, he leaps straight into the darkness like it's nothing. Moana hurries after him, and together they plunge into an abyss that suddenly turns into water, deep, cold, and glowing. Beneath the surface, a shimmering trail appears like a guiding road. They follow it through the underworld sea until the current spits them out in a strange, cavernous world. Maui lands first. Moana drops right on top of him, and the two tumble down a rocky slope in an undignified heap. Moana barely has time to catch her breath before danger comes in waves. A hungry creature lunges for her, only to be snatched and swallowed by something even worse. Giant bats swoop overhead, circling like they're deciding whether she's worth the effort, then vanish. A frantic multi-armed, monkey-like monster dives at her next, but she scrambles away and it recoils when she stumbles near a steaming hot spring. The place is a nightmare, yet somewhere inside it, Maui's hook is waiting. They spot it at last, perched atop a towering mound of treasure, gold coins, glittering relics, and stolen trinkets piled like a mountain. Maui stays hidden while Moana steps forward and does the one thing he can't. She makes herself impossible to ignore. She drapes herself in shiny valuables, strikes a bold pose, and calls out to the creature guarding it. The ground trembles. The mountain lifts. Because it isn't a mountain at all. It's the back of Tamatoa, a massive, gleaming crab who has been sitting beneath the hoard the entire time. As the crab rises, Moana realizes she's practically in its claws. Tamatoa's voice drips with vanity and menace. He admires his own reflection in the treasure, brags about his greatness, and toys with Moana like she's dinner entertainment. Moana keeps talking, stalling, flattering, provoking, anything to keep his focus forward. Because behind him, Maui is creeping closer to the hook. For a split second, Tamatoa prepares to crush Moana. But in that same moment, Maui snatches the hook. The crab reacts instantly, dropping Moana as he whips around. Maui tries to use the hook's magic right away, shifting into a fish, then into smaller animals. But his transformations come out clumsy and weak, like the hook isn't fully responding yet. Tamatoa slams him into the cavern wall with brutal force. Maui swings the hook of the crab's shell, but Tamatoa catches it like it's a toy and shoves Moana into a makeshift cage of treasure and bone. The fight turns messy. Tamatoa batters Maui again and again, his shell flashing with an eerie glow as he attacks. Maui reaches for the hook, only for Tamatoa to fling it out of reach. Moana realizes they need a smarter play. She pulls out Te Whiti's heart and flashes the green glow like bait. Tamatoa's attention snaps to it immediately, greed replacing rage. Moana bolts. In the scramble, she makes it look like the stone falls into a dark crevice. Tamatoa lunges after it, digging and clawing to retrieve the prize. But it's a trick. The real heart is still safe with Moana. While the crab is distracted, Moana grabs the hook, frees Maui, and the two sprint for the hot springs. They launch themselves into the steaming vents, and the pressure blasts them up and out, shooting them back into open air and dumping them onto a shoreline outside the monster realm. Maui, still half shaken and half proud, briefly shifts into a shark-like form as they catch their breath. Then reality hits. Te Ka, the raging lava demon guarding Te Whiti, is far worse than a treasure crab. Maui says it plainly. They're outmatched. Moana refuses to accept that. And Maui, finally quieter than usual, tells her the part of his story he never boasts about. He wasn't born divine. He was born human, abandoned as a baby and left to the sea. The gods found him and gifted him the hook, and from that moment on, he became desperate to matter. He performed grand feats for people, trying to earn love, trying to become enough, and the biggest, worst attempt at being a hero was stealing Te Whiti's heart, believing it would make humans admire him forever. Instead, it made him the villain in everyone's legend. Even so, Moana pushes him forward, and Maui starts training again, relearning control with the hook. He shifts into an eagle, shattering stone with his talons, then into a whale, so massive the splash rocks Moana's canoe with a sudden wave. Each change comes easier than the last. Eventually, they reach a heavy fog, dark, unnatural, thick like smoke over water. They press through it and emerge near Te Whiti's island. Except the place feels wrong. The ocean is tense. The air is hot, and the horizon burns. Maui shifts into a bird and darts ahead toward the flames, only to be attacked by blazing fireballs launched from the inferno itself. He dodges, pushing closer, until Te Ka rises from the fire like a living eruption and smashes him out of the sky. Maui crashes into the sea, and in the chaos the heart is knocked away. He recovers it, but Te Ka strikes again. Maui turns into a shark to escape, fleeing the heat and barely surviving the pursuit. Moana realizes it's something important. Te Ka won't step into deep water. The creature hesitates at the sea's edge. Moana uses that weakness, steering the canoe around the monster instead of charging straight in. Maui tries to stop her, warning her she's gambling with her life. But the moment they argue, Te Kā lands another devastating hit. Maui throws up the hook to absorb the impact, and the force blasts them away from the island. When they finally drift out of range, Maui sees the damage. His hook is cracked, fractured through the magic lines like a breaking bone. Panic flashes across his face. Without the hook, he's nothing, and if it shatters, he may never be able to change shape again. That fear wins. Maui gives Te Whiti's heart back to Moana, tells her he can't do it, and flies away, leaving her alone on the open sea. Moana's anger and heartbreak collapse into defeat. She holds the heart, then throws it into the ocean and tells the sea to find someone else, someone better, someone stronger, someone who isn't terrified. The water goes still. Then a glowing stingray appears, bright and gentle. And beside it, the spirit of Grandma Tala rises from the sea like moonlight made human. Tala speaks to Moana without scolding, only reminding her of who she already is. Not chosen because she's perfect, chosen because she refuses to quit. Moana dives. She swims down into the deep, retrieves Te Whiti's heart from the ocean floor, and climbs back into her canoe with renewed purpose. Then she turns toward the burning island again. As she approaches, Te Kā erupts into view, hurling flaming blasts. Moana maneuvers hard, steering through narrow gaps and using the rocks and channels to slip past. She baits Te Kā into charging the wrong direction, then cuts around while the monster's attention is locked elsewhere. But Te Kā adapts, throwing fire to seal off passages, collapsing rock into the water to trap her. In the turbulence, the heart slips from Moana's grasp. Hey, for once in his life, actually does something useful and catches it at the last second. Te Kā surges back, flips the canoe, and Moana struggles to right it as the monster closes in. And then wind. A shadow cuts across the firelight. Maui returns, diving in as a hawk, and slashing Te Kā's arm away from Moana. He shifts into a whale, crashing down with a massive wave that slams into the lava creature and launches Moana's canoe out of immediate danger. Maui keeps fighting, shifting forms mid-battle, biting, striking, dodging, but Te Kā is relentless. One hit sends Maui tumbling. Still, he drags himself back up, determined to give Moana one last opening. Te Kā turns toward Moana and launches a fireball directly at her. The ocean rises like a shield, absorbing the heat, but the canoe still takes the hit. Moana is thrown, yet lands safely on the far side of the island. Maui sees his chance to end it. He charges and drives a final strike with the hook, blasting Te Kā back. The attack works, but the cost is huge. The hook splinters and breaks. Maui stares at it, stunned as the last of its magic fades. Moana doesn't stop. She climbs the mountain where Te Whiti should be, faster, higher, breath-burning, only to reach the top and find emptiness. No goalies, no lush life, no Te Whiti waiting. Confused, she looks back toward Te Kā, and then she sees it, through the ash and flame, on Te Kā's chest, the same spiral pattern as the Heartstone. The truth hits Moana all at once. Te Kā isn't just a monster. Te Kā is Te Whiti, wounded, hollowed out, and raging because her heart is missing. Maui tries to draw Te Kā away, but Moana steps forward instead. She raises the heart and makes the sea part, creating a clear path so the creature can come to her. Te Kā charges, furious, then slows, as if something in Moana's calm stops the rage from fully taking hold. Moana walks forward without fear. She places her hand on the burning surface of Te Kā and gently fits the heart back into the open space on her chest. The ash shell cracks. It breaks away in pieces like a burned mask falling off. And beneath it, Te Whiti is revealed, towering, radiant, covered in living flowers and green growth, her true form returning in a rush of light. Wherever she touches, the world heals, stone turning to forest, scorched ground blooming again. Te Whiti lifts Moana and Maui safely in her hands. Maui, finally humble, apologizes for what he did long ago. Te Fiti forgives him and restores his hook, whole and shining again. Soon after, Moana says goodbye to Maui. He transforms into a hawk, soaring off across the ocean, still wandering but no longer running. Moana returns to Motunui at last. Her family rushes to her. The village celebrates, and the island begins to thrive again. The darkness fades, the fish return, and the people reclaim who they used to be, voyagers. In the end, Moana leads them back to the sea, and this time, her father sails beside her. Analysis, let me ask you something. How many animated movies have you watched, and then quietly realized they weren't really about the adventure at all? They were about identity, about fear, about the terrifying moment when you realize the life chosen for you might not be the life meant for you. That's where Moana lives. On the surface, it's a bright, musical Disney adventure with talking ocean waves, catchy songs, and a demigod voiced by one of the most recognizable people on the planet. But underneath that polished animation, this movie is wrestling with something far deeper. Who are you when the world tells you to stay where you are? Today, we're diving deep into Moana. Not just the story, but the meaning behind the waves. We're talking themes, symbolism, filmmaking choices, cultural context, and why this movie quietly redefined what a Disney princess story could be. This isn't a surface-level recap. This is a full cinematic breakdown. By the end of this video, you might realize Moana wasn't just asking its characters to cross the ocean. It was asking us to do the same. So take a breath. Listen to the rhythm of the sea. And let's begin. Moana was released in 2016, during a pivotal era for Disney animation, a time when the studio was actively redefining its legacy. The film was directed by Ron Clements and John Musker, the legendary duo behind The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Hercules. In many ways, Moana feels like their thematic farewell, a culmination of decades of storytelling evolution. The music was crafted by an unexpected powerhouse trio, Broadway phenomenon Lin-Manuel Miranda, Polynesian musician Opetaia Fawai, and veteran composer Mark Mancina. Genre-wise, Moana sits comfortably in animated musical fantasy, with strong adventure and mythological elements. It runs about 107 minutes, is primarily in English, and was produced in the United States by Walt Disney Animation Studios. But what truly separates Moana from its peers isn't its technical polish, it's its perspective. At its core, Moana tells the story of a young girl born to lead, but born with a heart that yearns for something beyond the horizon. Moana lives on a beautiful island where the ocean provides everything her people need. Or at least, that's what they believe. The island is safe, predictable, familiar, and Moana's future has already been written for her. She's meant to be the next chief. But from her earliest moments, Moana feels something pulling her toward the sea. Not curiosity, but recognition. As if the ocean itself sees something in her that no one else does. When her island begins to suffer, Moana is faced with an impossible choice. Obey tradition and stay, or risk everything to restore balance to the world. Her journey pushes her far beyond comfort, beyond certainty, and into a mythic past filled with legends, forgotten truths, and gods who aren't quite what the stories promised. What makes this story special is that the central conflict isn't about defeating an enemy. It's about confronting fear, misunderstanding, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we're allowed to be. And the ocean? It's not just a setting. It's a character. Moana is one of Disney's most quietly revolutionary protagonists. She isn't driven by romance. She isn't trying to escape her family. And she doesn't reject leadership. She just wants to understand it on her own terms. Her flaw isn't selfishness or naivety. It's self-doubt. Moana constantly questions whether the voice inside her is real or reckless. Her arc isn't about becoming brave. It's about realizing she always was. Then there's Maui, voiced by Dwayne Johnson. Maui is ego incarnate, a demigod obsessed with his own legend, desperately trying to convince the world and himself that he matters. His humor masks abandonment issues, insecurity, and a deep fear of being forgotten. Their relationship is not romantic, not parental, but transformational. They challenge each other's narratives. Moana helps Maui rediscover humility, while Maui helps Moana trust her instincts. Supporting characters like Moana's father represent tradition and fear, not as villains, but as protectors shaped by trauma. Her grandmother, on the other hand, is wisdom embodied. She understands that identity isn't inherited, it's discovered. Even the antagonistic forces in Moana aren't traditional villains. They're manifestations of imbalance, pain, and loss. Which brings us to one of the film's most powerful ideas. At its heart, Moana is about remembering who you are, not who others expect you to be, not who fear shapes you into, but who you were before the world told you to stay small. The ocean symbolizes the unknown, possibility, danger, truth. It calls only those willing to listen. The island represents comfort and stagnation, safety at the cost of growth. Te Fiti, the living island goddess, is perhaps the most profound metaphor in the film. Her transformation into darkness isn't caused by evil, it's caused by loss of identity. When her heart is stolen, she doesn't become a monster. She becomes wounded, and that changes everything. The film suggests that destruction often comes from pain, not malice. Healing requires understanding, not conquest. Moana doesn't defeat the darkness. She recognizes it, and that recognition, that's courage. Clements and Musker approach Moana with confidence born from experience. The pacing is deliberate, allowing emotional beats to breathe without losing momentum. There's a noticeable restraint in how humor is used. Jokes serve character, not distraction. The directors trust silence, visual storytelling, and music to carry emotional weight. Compared to their earlier works, Moana feels more introspective, less spectacle-driven, more personal. This isn't a story rushing toward a climax. It's one unfolding like a tide. Visually, Moana is stunning, but not flashy. The ocean is animated with personality, fluidity, and intention. It moves with emotion, not physics alone. Color palettes shift subtly with Moana's emotional state, moving from warm island tones to deep, uncertain blues. Camera movement often mirrors the sea, gentle when Moana is at peace, chaotic when she's lost. The visual language reinforces the story at every turn. The soundtrack is the soul of this movie. Each song serves narrative purpose. How Far I'll Go isn't just an anthem, it's a thesis statement. You're Welcome is character exposition disguised as humor. The blend of Polynesian rhythms with Broadway-style melodies creates something timeless and culturally grounded. Silence is used sparingly, but powerfully, especially in moments of realization and loss. The ocean doesn't always sing. Sometimes it listens. Auli'i Cravalho delivers one of Disney's most naturalistic voice performances. Her Moana feels real, unsure, determined, emotional without exaggeration. Dwayne Johnson brings surprising vulnerability beneath Maui's bravado, while the supporting cast adds warmth and authenticity. There's genuine chemistry, not forced, not manufactured. It feels lived in. The film's editing respects rhythm. Scenes transition smoothly, often using visual or musical bridges instead of abrupt cuts. Flashbacks are used sparingly, always in service of understanding rather than exposition. At just under 2 hours, the runtime feels earned. Nothing overstays its welcome. Moana was developed with cultural consultants from across the Pacific Islands, forming the Oceanic Story Trust. While not perfect, the effort to respect mythology, language, and tradition marked a significant shift in Disney's approach to representation. This film arrives during a global conversation about identity, heritage, and self-definition, and it doesn't shy away from those questions. One powerful interpretation of Moana is that the true villain is fear. Fear of loss, fear of the unknown, fear of change. The final confrontation isn't a battle. It's an act of empathy. Moana sees herself in Te Kā and chooses understanding over violence. That choice is radical. Hidden details, recurring motifs of spirals and waves, and lyrical callbacks all reinforce the idea that identity is cyclical, not linear. You don't become someone new. You remember. Critically and commercially, Moana was a massive success. Moana senses that staying put won't save her people, but her father, the village chief, fears what lies beyond the reef and strictly forbids anyone from sailing into the unknown. Moana, however, isn't the type to accept no as a final answer. Armed with stubborn courage and a strong sense of responsibility, she sets out to restore what was lost, and her path eventually crosses with Maui's in a way that's both funny and meaningful. Trying to explain the plot beat by beat can make it sound a little odd on paper, but the movie handles it with clarity and charm. It's a crowd pleaser because it combines an imaginative story with standout animation and a cast of characters that actually feel memorable. Moana herself is a huge part of why it works. She's brave and capable without being written as cold or overly tough. She isn't waiting for a rescue, and she isn't a stereotype. She's simply persistent, compassionate, and driven. And then there's the comic relief. Moana's animal companions bring plenty of laughs, but the chicken is the one that steals the spotlight for sheer absurdity. Disney has had funny sidekicks before, but this one plays like a deliberately chaotic joke. Possibly one of the most clueless creatures the studio has ever put on screen, and that's exactly why it's so effective. Dwayne Johnson also turns in a surprisingly strong performance. He's clearly having fun, and his singing is better than you might expect going in. That said, opinions on the music will probably vary. Some viewers may find the soundtrack memorable and energetic, while others might feel that not every number sticks the landing. Even when the songs are pleasant in the moment, a few don't linger long after the credits roll, especially compared to the most instantly hummable classics Disney is known for. Where the movie is hardest to criticize is its visual design. The ocean, the skies, the vegetation, the lighting, everything looks rich and alive. The film captures the atmosphere of the South Pacific with a sense of warmth and authenticity that makes the setting feel like a character of its own. If you've ever traveled in that region, or even just dreamed of it, the look and spirit of the world here can really hit home. The water animation in particular is stunning, and small details, like textures, motion, and Maui's tattoo work, show the kind of craftsmanship that separates a good animated film from a truly impressive one. In the bigger picture of Disney's modern era, Moana fits comfortably among the studio's strongest recent entries. Disney has always had ups and downs across decades, but in their more recent revival stretch, they've delivered several animated films that balance heart, humor, and technical excellence. Moana belongs in that conversation, one of their best efforts in years. That doesn't mean it's perfect. The pacing softens a bit near the end, and a couple of story beats feel slightly rushed, particularly around character turnarounds. Some side elements also feel like they were included more out of tradition than necessity, and not every comedic moment lands equally well. Still, those are relatively minor bumps compared to how much the film gets right. You'll also hear common critiques, that the story follows familiar patterns, that the chicken can be annoying, or that certain character portrayals lean too broad. Personally, those points didn't derail the experience. The humor worked more often than not, the emotional moments earned their place, and the film's adventurous spirit carried it through. Overall, Moana succeeds because it knows what it wants to be. A bright, heartfelt voyage with strong characters, striking artistry, and a tone that welcomes both kids and adults. It's funny, moving, and often genuinely inspiring. Exactly the kind of animated feature that reminds you why Disney still has the power to deliver something special. Disney's Moana may not reinvent the adventure formula, but it delivers it with such strong rhythm, charm, and craft that it hardly matters. The story moves with confidence, never dragging, never rushing, pulling you along with a steady sense of wonder. What really elevates it is how naturally it weaves Polynesian-inspired culture, spirituality, and seafaring traditions into the experience. These elements don't feel like a decorative add-on. They feel like the foundation the film stands on. And while you can spot a few familiar Disney-style beats if you've seen enough of their classics, It comes across more like a warm nod to their legacy than a company scraping for ideas. Visually, it's a knockout. The ocean scenes alone are worth the price of admission. Bright, alive, and constantly shifting in a way that feels almost magical. Even sequences that could have been throwaway in-between moments, like the coconut pirate encounter, end up being surprisingly fun, energetic, and striking to watch. The music doesn't just pause the story so characters can sing. The songs actively push the plot forward and reveal what people want and fear. By the time the finale arrives, the tension is high, the stakes feel real, and the climax lands with genuine excitement. Character-wise, Moana easily earns a spot among Disney's strongest female leads. Brave, stubborn in the best way, and driven by curiosity rather than romance. Maui is a perfect counterpart. Big personality, layered motivations, and genuinely funny without turning into a shallow side gag. Their dynamic is a major reason the movie works so well. The humor and emotional core often come directly from the way they clash, cooperate, and gradually understand each other. And yes, Hey is ridiculous, but in a way that feels intentional. If someone finds him dumb or irritating, that's kind of the point, and the film smartly makes his presence matter instead of letting him exist purely for random noise. The voice cast is outstanding across the board. Auli'i Cravalho gives Moana a real sense of heart and determination, and her singing is seriously impressive. Dwayne Johnson might sound like an odd pick for a mythic demigod on paper, but he's surprisingly effective, funny, charismatic, and more emotionally grounded than you might expect. Alan Tudyk brings extra flavor in his comedic role, and Jemaine Clement adds a delightfully unhinged edge that makes his scenes pop. As for the plot, Moana grows up on a peaceful island where her grandmother shares legends about Maui, a powerful demigod with a magical hook that lets him transform. Long ago, Maui stole the heart of Te Fiti, triggering a spreading darkness and unleashing the volcanic force Te Ka. Over time, the curse begins to affect Moana's home. Fish vanish, the environment weakens, and the island's future feels threatened. Moana's father, Chief Tue, tries to keep everyone safe by forbidding travel beyond the reef, but Moana is pulled toward the sea and ultimately chosen to restore what was broken. She sets out to find Maui, and together they face dangerous waters, strange enemies, and Te Ka itself, all to return the heart and bring balance back. In the end, Moana succeeds where it counts. It's gorgeous, exciting, funny, and full of heart. Even if the basic structure feels familiar, the setting, characters, music, and sheer entertainment value make it feel fresh. Disney's done it again, another modern animated classic that's easy to enjoy and hard to forget. Watching Moana ended up being a surprisingly big highlight for me. The whole journey has this spirited set sail into the unknown energy that makes it easy to get swept up in, and I genuinely enjoyed tagging along with Moana as she pushes beyond what everyone expects of her. The movie keeps things moving with a strong mix of adventure and action, and the different conflicts she faces are consistently entertaining rather than repetitive. One of the coolest surprises was how creative the threats and set pieces feel, especially the lava creature, which looks fantastic and adds a real burst of excitement whenever it's on screen. And then there's Maui, voiced by Dwayne Johnson, who brings a totally different kind of charm. Loud, cocky, funny, and eventually oddly endearing. Moana and Maui together make an excellent pairing, one of Disney's stronger modern duos, because their personalities clash in a way that's funny, but they also balance each other as the story goes on. The voice work across the board is impressive. Auli'i Cravalho gives Moana a lot of warmth and determination, and Johnson's performance as Maui is clearly having fun without turning the character into a one-note joke. I also didn't realize Alan Tudyk was involved until later, which was a nice bonus. Music is another big one here. The songs don't feel like random interruptions. They're placed in ways that actually support the story, and most of them are the kind you catch yourself humming later. I'm not always sold on musical numbers in animated films, but this one makes them feel natural and purposeful, with strong vocals and memorable melodies. Where I slightly differ from some viewers is with the comic psychic element. I didn't personally find the silly chicken character as entertaining as the rest of the cast, and for me, it wasn't on the same level as the movie's sharper humor. That said, the film still delivers plenty of laughs, and the comedy usually lands because it's tied to character moments rather than forced gags. Story-wise, Moana has a classic foundation: danger, courage, and a very clear struggle between restoring balance versus letting darkness spread. But it also adds themes that give it heart: friendship, forgiveness, and learning to accept who you are. The plot follows Moana, the daughter of her island's chief, as she defies her community's rules and sails beyond the reef to find the demigod who can help her return something vital and save her home from decay. It's the kind of story that works for kids because it's exciting and simple to follow, and it works for adults because it's also about responsibility, fear, and growth. Visually, it's stunning. The animation style has a bright, inviting look, but it's the detail that really stands out. Every scene feels carefully crafted, and the ocean especially looks incredible. I was also impressed by the character animation. The hair, facial expressions, and small movements make everyone feel more alive and expressive. Moana comes across as genuinely charismatic, and Maui manages to be both ridiculous and lovable. What I appreciate most is the movie's tone. It could have leaned too hard into messaging or become overly sentimental, but instead it stays confident and fun while still giving the main character real development. Moana's growth is the clearest example, but even side characters get little moments that hint at deeper history. One touch I really liked involves Moana's father. There's a brief line in an early song that hints he learned something the hard way long before the story explains it, and that small detail adds a lot to his character. In the end, Moana feels like a complete package: exciting adventure, strong characters, great performances, catchy music, and genuinely beautiful animation. I don't hand out top-tier praise to animated films very often, but this one earns it. It's absolutely the kind of movie that works for a family watch, and the kind that's easy to re-watch, whether you're paying close attention or it's become a familiar favorite that's always welcome on again. Absolutely. Here's a rewritten version that keeps the same theme and overall review vibe, but changes the phrasing, flow, and structure enough to feel original and avoid reuse issues. I also made a few minor tweaks like tightening the pacing, adding smoother transitions, and varying how the plot beats are described. It's a memorable line from a memorable song, and it fits this film perfectly, because what really stands out here is how much care was put into every layer of the storytelling. The script is stronger than most animated adventures of its kind, not only in the way characters speak to one another, but also in how the story builds momentum and emotion. The music isn't just catchy filler either. The songs actually help carry the narrative, deepen character moments, and make the journey feel earned. That effort carries through the entire production. The voice cast delivers genuinely engaging performances across the board, and the animation is polished and expressive in a way that makes the world feel alive. What surprised me most is how consistently the movie can still land emotionally, even though it's clearly designed for families. It's the kind of film that might start as something the kids want on, but ends up pulling the adults in too, because there's craft, heart, and humor here that works beyond the target age group. Even if you don't have children, it's still very easy to recommend. Before it arrived, I'd heard about Disney's newest computer-animated release multiple times and honestly wasn't sure what to expect. But the promotional material looked promising, and once the early reactions and reviews started leaning strongly positive, I decided it was worth seeing for myself. The story centers on Moana Waialaki, voiced by Auli'i Cravalho, a spirited teenager living on the island of Motunui, where Father Chief Te, Temuera Morrison, leads the community. From the time she's small, Moana feels drawn to the sea in a way she can't fully explain. In an early turning point, the ocean seems to choose her, entrusting her with a treasured stone containing the heart of the goddess Te Fiti, a symbol tied to life and balance. As Moana grows, she becomes more determined to explore beyond her island's boundaries, but her parents, especially her father, push back hard. Their island, they insist, has everything they could ever need. The problem is, reality begins proving otherwise. Fish become harder to find, Crops start failing, and the natural abundance the community relies on slowly fades. Moana suggests they venture past the reef to search for help and resources, but her father shuts it down immediately. Sailing beyond the reef is forbidden, and it's not just tradition driving that rule. There's fear behind it. Moana's mother, Sina, Nicole Scherzinger, explains that Tue's opposition comes from personal loss tied to the ocean. The person who truly understands Moana's restlessness is her grandmother, Grandma Tala, Rachel House, who shares the deeper history Moana has been missing. Tala tells her of Te Fiti and how her heart was taken long ago by the demigod Maui, voiced by Dwayne Johnson. Maui's intention was to give humanity the power within it, but his decision unleashed danger. A destructive force confronted him, the heart disappeared into the sea, and Maui himself vanished from the world. When Moana attempts to go against her father's rules and take a boat beyond the reef, things go badly. Yet the larger push arrives when Tala's health suddenly worsens. In a final, urgent moment, her grandmother encourages Moana to do what she's always felt called to do: leave the island, find Maui, and return the heart to Te Fiti before everything collapses. Moana sets out on her own, though she's not entirely alone for long. A hilariously useless but oddly lovable rooster named Haihei, Alan Tudyk, ends up tagging along, and Moana is shadowed at times by Manta Ray, suggesting a spiritual connection to Tala watching over her. Guided by the stars and a path hinted at through legend, Moana's voyage takes a rough turn when a violent storm knocks her off course. When she wakes, she finds herself on a distant island, and, finally, face to face with Maui. Unfortunately for her, he's not exactly eager to jump into a mission of responsibility. He's more interested in showing off his reputation, talking about his past heroics, and avoiding the consequences of what happened. Maui tries to ditch her by trapping her and stealing her boat, but Moana refuses to be brushed aside. She pushes back, stays focused, and keeps pulling the conversation toward what actually matters: restoring the heart and saving her home. The journey quickly turns dangerous, with the pair facing bizarre threats, including a swarm of tiny coconut-armored pirates known as the Kakamora. It's a fast, inventive sequence, and it helps cement the movie's adventurous tone while keeping the humor intact. Eventually, Maui agrees to help, but with conditions. To do anything meaningful, he needs his magical fishhook, the source of much of his power. Their search leads them to the realm of monsters, where Maui believes the hook is being kept in the hoard of Tamatoa, Jemaine Clement, a massive, glitter-obsessed crab who treats self-image like a religion. The confrontation plays out like a musical showdown, and it's one of the film's most entertaining detours. Funny, stylized, and strangely sharp. With the hook reclaimed, the movie shifts into a more classic training and bonding stretch. Maui teaches Moana techniques of navigation and sailing, reading winds, watching the sky, and trusting the stars. As their partnership strengthens, Maui begins reconnecting with who he really is beneath the swagger. We learn he isn't truly a god by birth. He was human first, shaped by abandonment and later elevated by divine forces. That backstory adds weight to his ego and explains why he clings so hard to being seen as the hero. When they finally approach Te Fiti, they're met by Te Ka, a furious, lava-like creature determined to stop them. The threat is overwhelming. Moana tries to improvise a plan by exploiting the monster's relationship with the ocean, but the battle goes badly. The damage isn't only physical. Maui's hook is cracked and nearly ruined, and fear takes over. He leaves, convinced that continuing will destroy the only thing that makes him Maui. In a cruel parting shot, he tells Moana that the ocean chose wrong. Moana hits her lowest moment here. Feeling like she's failed everyone, she even considers giving the heart back to the sea and walking away from the mission altogether. But she's not truly alone. Tala's spirit returns to encourage her, reminding her that leadership isn't about never falling. It's about finding the courage to rise again. Moana regains her resolve, retrieves the heart, and sets course once more. In the final stretch, Moana confronts Te Ka again, this time with a clearer understanding. Maui returns as well, choosing to fight not for glory, but because it's the right thing to do. His hook is ultimately destroyed in the clash, but the true turning point isn't won through brute force. Moana recognizes something deeper. Te Kā isn't just a monster. It's Te Fiti herself, warped by rage and loss because her heart was taken. That realization changes everything. With the ocean giving her a path forward, Moana approaches Te Fiti and restores the heart. Balance returns, life blooms again, and Motunui's suffering is reversed. In the end, Moana's people gain not only restored land and resources, but a renewed sense of identity and exploration. Maui is given a fresh hook, Moana receives a new canoe, and the film closes with a satisfying sense of healing rather than simple victory. Awards attention followed for good reason. The movie earned major nominations, including Academy Award recognition for Best Animated Feature and for an original song, How Far I'll Go, plus notable mentions from groups like the Golden Globes and BAFTA. Whether or not awards matter to you, it's clearly a film that made a big impact. Story-wise, the setup is simple but effective. Moana is the daughter of her island's chief, and her father is determined that no one crosses the reef surrounding their home. He believes it's the only way to keep everyone safe from an old threat tied to the sea. The problem is, danger doesn't stay politely outside the border. Life on the island begins to fail anyway. Crops spoil, fish disappear, and survival starts to feel uncertain. Moana, meanwhile, feels something deeper calling her, almost as if the ocean itself is choosing her. She becomes convinced she's meant to leave, find the source of the disaster, and restore what's been thrown out of balance. That mission leads her to Maui, the flashy, mischievous demigod whose past mistakes helped trigger the whole mess. They're an unlikely duo, but together they're the only real shot at setting things right, repairing what was broken and calming the forces that are turning against their world. From there, the movie launches into a stream of escapades, storms, slapstick mishaps, daring stunts, close calls with pirates, and confrontations with monstrous obstacles, all while the soundtrack keeps the pace upbeat. The writing moves quickly and doesn't take itself too seriously. There's plenty of humor, a little bite of sarcasm here and there, and a sense of playful momentum that keeps the story breezing along. The stakes are present, but it's not a grim film. There isn't constant tension or heavy peril. And honestly, that's part of its appeal. It's meant to be a fun, uplifting watch for kids and adults alike. What surprised me most is how much the film leans into myth as something living, not just decorative background. I expected a standard, assembly line princess formula. Instead, Moana feels like a hero shaped by legend, someone stepping into a role bigger than herself, but without losing her humanity. There are a couple of showy side detours, like the coconut pirate and sparkly crab moments, that feel stylistically separate from the rest, but they're brief and don't derail the overall emotional core. On a more film nerd level, the movie does something really interesting with visual storytelling layers. It plays with the idea of stories inside stories, using different animation styles and textures to create a sense of myth versus everyday reality. You see this in the way ancient legends are presented through stylized imagery, and even more in how Maui's tattoos act like little animated characters of their own, commenting and reacting in a different visual language. What's clever is how these layers don't just sit in the background. They interact with the characters and help shape how the world feels. That layering creates a strong emotional effect. Moana's daily life feels grounded and close, while the mythic elements feel like an overlapping realm that can push into reality at any moment. It helps explain why the movie can feel so personal even while dealing with gods, curses, and volcanic monsters. From the moment Moana is in the sea seems to recognize her, yet her father's fear keeps the community confined. That push and pull between safety and destiny becomes the heart of the film, and it lands beautifully. Overall, it's a vibrant, funny, and heartfelt adventure, rooted in culture and tradition, powered by music, and anchored by a lead character who doesn't need romance to be compelling. Simply put, it's a really entertaining ride. When the island's food supply starts failing, coconut spoiling, fish thinning out. Moana feels the ocean's pull more strongly than ever. Even with her father's strict warning to never sail beyond the reef, rooted in painful history, the growing crisis makes staying put impossible. With quiet encouragement from her grandmother Tala, Moana accepts that the only way to help her people is to leave home and restore what was thrown out of balance long ago. That mission sends her across open water in search of Maui, the larger-than-life trickster demigod whose past mistake set the current disaster in motion. The setup is simple, but the setting is fresh and the adventure is paced well. The opening act builds the tension on the island. The middle section keeps things moving with inventive encounters at sea, and the final stretch lands with real emotional weight. It's the kind of story that may not rely on shocking twists. It still feels satisfying because the journey has momentum and heart. A huge reason it works is Moana herself. The film introduces her as an enchanting child, then lets her grow into a determined, curious, and stubborn teen who feels like an actual person rather than a checklist of strong heroine traits. Auli'i Cravalho's voice performance is a major part of that. Warm, energetic, and genuinely expressive, especially in moments where Moana doubts herself but pushes forward anyway. Visually, her character design is excellent, too. Expressive animation, believable movement, and a sense of personality in every gesture. Maui is just as entertaining to watch. He's a walking spectacle, and the living tattoos are a brilliant touch. Fun, clever, and often more revealing than his words. Dwayne Johnson brings a confident charm to the role and clearly enjoys it, which makes Maui's swagger feel playful instead of grating. More importantly, the character still gets room for surprising vulnerability, which keeps him from being just the comic relief. Speaking of visuals, the animation is flat-out stunning. The environments are richly detailed. Lush land scenes, massive ocean horizons, and action set pieces that make the sea feel like its own character. The effects work is especially impressive. Hair, water, and lava are animated with a beauty that's hard not to stare at. Even without treating the 3D presentation as essential, the film has moments that feel designed to make you lean in and quietly go wow. And there are a few sequences where the emotion, the imagery, and the storytelling sync perfectly. Those throat-tightening beats that hit harder than you expect from an animated adventure. The humor mostly lands, too. There are running jokes and quick gags that work because they don't constantly interrupt the momentum. One standout action moment, Moana battling an army of coconut pirates, is energetic, funny, and legitimately awesome. And the climax? It's not only exciting. It's the kind of payoff that feels earned, delivering a final stretch that's both intense and surprisingly moving. That said, it isn't flawless. The comedy animal sidekick tradition is alive and well here. The pig wisely stays behind, but the rooster does come along, and while it has its moments, it's not essential. The movie could have trimmed some of that and lost nothing. The songs are also a mixed bag, depending on what you want from Disney musicals. They're staged well and fit the film's tone, but a few melodies feel more conversational than instantly memorable, less big showstopper, more story moving forward. Still, they're pleasant, and they may grow on repeat viewings. Watching Moana, 2016, in full for the first time, especially with anticipation for Moana 2, 2024, made it easy to see why people hold this one so fondly. It's a beautiful, energetic coming-of-age story with a relatable lead, a charismatic co-star, and animation that's frequently breathtaking. Even with a couple of small irritations, yes, the rooster, yes, the very Disney-ish sidekick choices, the film's strengths overwhelm its weaknesses. By the time the final emotional notes hit, it's hard not to feel like you've been swept up in something genuinely special. Disney's Moana is a visual showcase that really leans into how far modern animation can go. By blending CGI with hand-drawn touches, the filmmakers create a world that feels rich and alive, especially whenever the ocean takes center stage. The water effects are stunning, shimmering, foamy, and constantly in motion in a way that gives the film its own personality. And because the character animation is so expressive, particularly in the faces, many emotional beats land as well as the action does. A big part of what makes the movie work is how the ocean isn't just a backdrop, but a presence that shapes Moana's story. When the film uses stylized, more illustrated moments alongside the slick CG look, it adds depth and energy, making the biggest set pieces feel even more impactful. From tropical plants and wildlife to the spray of the sea and the tiny facial nuances of the characters, it's basically eye candy from beginning to end. Sound-wise, it delivers too. The music is upbeat and easy to hum afterward, with playful lyrics and an overall vibe that encourages rewatching. The dialogue is snappy, sometimes cheeky, and not afraid to push slightly edgy humor for a laugh, without ever losing the family-friendly tone. The cast performs strongly as well, and both Auli'i Cravalho and Dwayne Johnson bring a lot of charisma to their roles. Johnson in particular is surprisingly effective as Maui, and his songs are better than some might expect. Story-wise, it's definitely built on a familiar Disney framework. A determined young heroine who wants something beyond her island life, a parent figure trying to hold her back, and a journey that turns into a high-stakes mission to restore balance. Along the way, she picks up the usual ingredients: wisecracking companion, adventure beats, and of course a lovable but not too bright animal sidekick. None of that is exactly new, but it's delivered with enough charm and momentum that it stays entertaining. That said, the movie isn't flawless. The pacing can feel stretched at points, and there are moments where the plot raises questions, like how certain major island landmarks or secrets could be unknown to someone who's lived there her whole life. Some comedic villains and side threats also feel a bit manufactured, and the coconut pirate sequence, while energetic, comes across as a little derivative, almost like a watered-down version of other animated comedy henchmen. Even with those issues, the film remains a strong entry in Disney's modern lineup. The seafaring sections are easily the most exciting, and Moana herself is an appealing lead, capable, brave, and genuinely proactive rather than just reacting to events. The finale is especially satisfying, with an emotional payoff that manages to feel bigger than the rest of the film's spectacle. Overall, Moana is likely to be a hit for kids, and for plenty of adults too. Technically, it's top-tier animation, packed with color, texture, lighting, and detail. If you're the kind of parent who ends up watching it repeatedly because your children love it, you may eventually feel the repetition wearing it down, but it's easy to understand why it becomes a favorite in the first place. Disney's Moana is one of those movies where I walked away thinking that was pretty good, but also kind of a mess. It's definitely not bad. It has charm, humor, and plenty of eye candy, but the storytelling feels shaky in a way that kept pulling me out of it. I enjoyed parts of the ride, yet I kept wondering how many more big-budget animated films we're going to get where the visuals do most of the heavy lifting while the plot runs on fuzzy logic. The strongest thing the movie has going for it is how it looks. The ocean animation is stunning, the colors pop, and a lot of scenes feel like they were designed to be replayed just to appreciate the craft. Early on, Moana as a small child is especially lovable, and the island setting is vibrant in a way that makes you want to live in it for a while. The film clearly pulls inspiration from Polynesian cultures, and it sprinkles in music, dance, and tradition that give it a distinct identity beyond the usual fairy tale template. Moana herself is a solid lead, curious, brave, and determined, but not smug or invincible in a way that becomes annoying. One thing I actually liked is that the story doesn't force a romance into her journey. Her connection with Maui stays in the lane of partnership and friendship, and that choice helps the movie feel a little less predictable in at least one department. Where the film stumbles hardest is the plot. The setup involves a stolen heart, a sort of magical jewel, island curses, and a demigod with a magic fishhook. Yet the timeline and rules of this world are oddly unclear. We're told events happened long ago, but Maui looks exactly the same, and it's never fully explained in a satisfying way. The movie throws a bunch of weird encounters at Moana and Maui, some fun, some random, and too often it feels like the script is checking off adventure stops rather than building a story that naturally escalates. Maui is also a mixed bag. Dwayne Johnson brings energy, and some of the jokes land, but the character sometimes plays like the classic big doofus sidekick who complicates everything while the heroine carries the actual competence. His moving tattoos are supposed to add comedic punch, and occasionally they do, but plenty of those bits feel like they're trying a little too hard. Musically, the film has a few catchy moments, though not every song hits with the same impact. There's also a fun streak of humor running through some of the musical choices. At times it feels almost like the movie is borrowing swagger from outside influences rather than staying purely island myth in tone, but it works often enough to keep things lively. Underneath it all, Moana fits neatly into a modern Disney pattern. A capable female hero, a clumsy male counterpart, a message about identity and purpose, and a twist that you can usually see coming well before the movie reveals it. That doesn't make it automatically bad. It's a formula because it works, but it does make the story feel less daring than the world it's painted onto. So overall, beautiful to look at, genuinely entertaining in spots, and often sweet, especially when it leans into family, tradition, and Moana's pull toward the sea. But if you're hoping for a tight, fully satisfying narrative, the movie's rules and pacing may leave you asking why certain things happen the way they do. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it, and I'll probably remember the imagery more than the story. Moana is one of Disney's modern princess-style adventures, helmed by veteran storytellers Ron Clements and John Musker, the duo behind classics like Aladdin and The Little Mermaid. The film centers on Moana, a spirited Polynesian teenager and the chief's daughter, who lives on a peaceful island surrounded by a reef that she's always been tempted to cross. When her people's way of life starts to fall apart, crops failing, the ocean turning against them, she's pushed into doing what she's secretly wanted all along: set sail and search for answers beyond the horizon. The big problem traces back to Maui, a legendary demigod whose past mistake involves taking a sacred relic from a goddess, triggering a spreading blight that threatens islands and oceans alike. Moana's mission is simple in concept, but huge in scale. Find Maui, convince him to fix what he broke, and restore balance before her home is lost. Visually, the movie is stunning. The ocean feels alive, the lighting is gorgeous, and nearly every scene pops with rich color and depth. Disney's animation team clearly went all in here. Between the sweeping waves, glowing sunsets, and vibrant island landscapes, it's the kind of film that's easy to watch purely for the artistry. The voice cast is another strong point. Auli'i Cravalho, making her feature debut as Moana, gives the character warmth and determination without forcing it. She sounds natural in both emotional moments and the more playful scenes, and she carries the film confidently. As for Dwayne Johnson as Maui, he's the scene stealer. He brings a ton of energy and comedic timing, and his larger-than-life performance reminded me of the big personality fun of the genie from Aladdin. Maui's shape-shifting antics and swagger could have been annoying in the wrong hands, but Johnson makes him oddly charming even when he's being a total headache. One thing that might surprise some people: this story doesn't rely on a traditional big bad villain. Instead, it leans more into mythic challenges, personal growth, and the consequences of past choices. And yes, this is definitely a musical. The songs are worked into the narrative smoothly, and while not every track is an instant earworm, the music fits the tone well and adds emotion where it counts. The pacing stays lively, and the humor usually lands, even if it occasionally pushes a little too hard. Moana and Maui's dynamic is the heart of the movie. Their relationship evolves from reluctant teamwork into something more meaningful, and the film gives both characters room to grow without turning the story into a lecture. That said, not everything hits perfectly. Some side characters feel like they hang around longer than necessary, and there's at least one comedic pirate sequence that feels more like a detour than something the movie truly needs. Still, even with those bumps, the film balances adventure, heart, and spectacle really well. Overall, Moana is an adventurous, heartfelt, family-friendly ride with top-tier animation, strong performances, and a fun mythic vibe. It may not reinvent Disney's formula, but it executes it with enough charm and polish to be easy to recommend, especially for families looking for something uplifting and visually beautiful. To give her proper credit, Moana is undeniably likable, bright, cute, brave, and stubborn in a good way. She's the kind of preteen heroine audiences can root for instantly. The problem is that she also feels very familiar. Even if you ignore the current trend, she still lands in the same well-worn Disney lane. She's special, she's tied to leadership, and she's destined for more than her home can offer. Once again, we've got royalty. Well, the chief's daughter, dreaming of sailing past the horizon to find what's out there. Meanwhile, the whole community is basically trapped in a loop. Stay on the island, grow coconuts, eat coconuts, and sing enthusiastically about coconuts. And look, I'm not anti-coconut. I respect coconut. But if I'm choosing a lifelong menu, I'm leaning fish. The film fills in the history with a dramatic myth. A sacred object is stolen from a local goddess, and Maui, part demigod, part troublemaker, ends up in the middle of it. Visually, that whole legend sequence is one of the highlights. It's stylish, inventive, and more dynamic than the usual copy and paste feeling some animated films fall into. Still, even when something looks fresh, it can remind you of other animated adventure stories. There were moments where I caught faint echoes of films like Kung Fu Panda. Not a crime, just not exactly a shock. What bothered me more wasn't the mythology itself, but how often empowerment stories lean on supernatural intervention. Even if you accept magic as part of the animated movie contract, it raises a question: why do so many modern girl power leads end up needing a mystical shortcut? Think about how often the narrative gives Elsa, Moana, or even Rey an extra advantage that reframes victory as destiny or powers rather than resilience, skill, or growth. In Moana, magical help arrives constantly. Ocean-assisted rescues, convenient transformations, spiritual nudges, demigod abilities, the whole package. After a while, the story trains you not to worry. When miracles keep showing up right on schedule, tension disappears. You stop believing danger is real. And when danger feels fake, adventure stops being thrilling. I understand the film wants to teach kids, especially young girls, to be courageous, to question unfair rules, and to figure out who they are. That message is fine, but there's an awkward contradiction baked into it. How does someone truly find herself when she's framed as the chosen one from the start? At that point, the journey becomes less about self-discovery and more about discovering the job destiny assigned her. The movie also tries to carry a whole suitcase of lessons at once, so many that it starts to feel like a motivational poster factory. And not all of those lessons are equally honest. If you're going to tell children that anything is possible if they believe hard enough, then you can't also pretend that trying is the same as succeeding. Sometimes trying doesn't work. Sometimes you fail, and failure is part of life. I'd honestly be curious to see a Disney story that allows failure to exist without treating it like a temporary glitch before triumph. If that idea feels too risky for a princess story, they could always test it on a male character first. To be fair, I did enjoy the film's look. The visuals are gorgeous, though that's becoming the baseline expectation for Disney rather than a bonus. Plenty of animated movies look incredible while delivering a fairly lightweight plot. Finding Dory comes to mind. So what does Moana bring that's distinct? The best answer is the cultural flavor. The movie immediately sets a tone with Polynesian-inspired music, details, and aesthetics. It does give you a strong sense of place early on. But for much of the runtime, it turns into a sea quest, an adventure format we've seen countless times. And while the songs are solid and the colors are vibrant, the story sometimes feels like it's using culture as a frame around a familiar template, instead of letting the setting shape a truly different kind of narrative. A version of this movie that spent more time exploring island life, traditions, and community dynamics, without defaulting to the usual young rebel challenges the old ways pattern, might have felt less predictable. Because that's the thing, the structure has become recognizable. The strict tradition, the parental rule, nature as a moral compass, the spirited daughter who must go beyond. The film ends up feeling like it's hitting required poses rather than surprising you. As for the voice cast, Dwayne Johnson and Auli'i Cravalho make a strong duo. Their performances carry a lot of the movie's energy, and some of the singing moments are genuinely fun. But I couldn't help noticing how heavily the marketing emphasized their heritage. It made me wonder if Disney was preemptively defending itself against accusations of casting insensitivity. And maybe that caution was justified. This movie still ran into controversy, the costume situation being the obvious example. If anything, it shows how carefully Disney tries to navigate cultural criticism now, whether or not the film itself fully escapes it. In the end, even when I'm critical of Moana, I can't deny it's very much a product of its time, and it clearly wants to do the right thing in terms of its messaging and representation. I just wish the storytelling felt bolder, the tension felt real, and the empowerment felt less dependent on supernatural assistance. Also, confession, I'm currently more excited to watch Coco. Finally, a big animated story centered on a boy. Sorry, but if Disney is supposed to awaken the inner child, mine is apparently still wearing a superhero cape and making vroom vroom noises. I don't mind a girl-led story at all. I just don't want every modern heroine to be powered up by destiny, magic, or cosmic approval. Give me courage that's earned, not granted. So yes, I enjoyed the spectacle. I appreciated the cultural touches. I liked the leads, but I wanted more risk, more originality, and less magic solves it. And if Disney could do that while keeping the charm, well, they should. Moana, 4 stars out of 5. Disney's 56th animated feature is a computer-animated fantasy adventure starring the voice talent of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson with Auli'i Cravalho as Moana. Disney's Moana is an animated adventure rooted in Polynesian-inspired mythology, following a young islander who's pushed far beyond the reef to save her people. The story centers on an ancient Polynesian community whose home is slowly being harmed by a spreading curse. When food sources begin to fail and danger creeps closer, the chief's teenage daughter refuses to sit back and watch everything collapse. Instead, she chooses the risky path, sailing into the unknown to find the one being who might help reverse what's happening. Maui, a legendary demigod who, ironically, played a role in causing the disaster in the first place. The voice cast is a major plus here. Auli'i Cravalho leads the film with a lot of heart, and it's wild to remember she was only around 14 when she was cast. Dwayne Johnson brings big energy to Maui, while the supporting voices, Alan Tudyk, Jemaine Clement, Tamura Morrison, Nicole Scherzinger, and Rachel House, round out the world nicely. Behind the scenes, it's also stacked. The directing team includes Ron Clements and John Musker, known for The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, and The Princess and the Frog, alongside Don Hall and Chris Williams, who worked on Big Hero 6. The writing comes from a combination of Disney veterans and newer voices, which helps it feel familiar but still fresh in moments. At the heart of the film is Moana, daughter of the village chief, who's being prepared to lead, even though she's always had that pull toward adventure. That conflict is set up early, duty versus the urge to explore. One of the most enjoyable characters, honestly, is her grandmother, Tala, who doesn't try to fix Moana's curiosity. She encourages it, and that emotional support becomes a key part of why Moana keeps going. Once Moana meets Maui, the tone shifts into a buddy adventure dynamic. Maui is loud, cocky, and convinced he's the hero of every story ever told. He's also a shapeshifter and a skilled wayfinder, carrying a magical hook gifted by the gods. But he's not just comic relief. His choices have consequences, and the film doesn't let him dodge responsibility forever. The main threat, triggered by Maui's theft of the heart of Te Fiti, takes shape in the terrifying Te Ka, a lava monster whose rage spreads across the ocean and begins poisoning islands one by one. If you're into mythology, Moana has a lot to enjoy. It plays with legendary figures and mythic logic in a way that's easy for kids to follow while still being interesting for adults. Maui, in particular, feels like a blend of familiar archetypes, part trickster, part bringer of gifts to humanity. Watching the film's version of a monster realm beneath the sea is also a highlight, especially the scene featuring Tamatoa, voiced by Jemaine Clement, a flashy, greedy creature who steals the spotlight with pure chaotic flair. Visually, the movie is gorgeous. The animation is bright, detailed, and full of life, especially the ocean, which feels like a character all on its own. The color palette pops without becoming overwhelming, and the movie knows how to use scale. Quiet beach moments feel intimate, while open water sequences feel huge and dangerous. The musical elements are a mixed bag, depending on what you're looking for. A few numbers are genuinely memorable, and Maui's Big, You're Welcome sequence stands out for its fun visuals and playful rhythm. Other songs may not linger as strongly the moment the credits roll, but they work in the context of the story, especially for younger viewers. On a personal note, this is the kind of movie that families end up replaying. In my case, it's one my wife has watched multiple times, and I'd caught pieces of it before actually sitting down for a fuller viewing. We even put it on because our daughter has a toy that plays music and summarizes the story, so we hoped she'd lock in during the songs. And sure enough, the musical moments held her attention the most. Overall, I'd call Moana a warm, entertaining film with strong animation, likable characters, and an adventurous spirit. It has emotional weight when it needs it, especially near the end, and it carries a message about identity, responsibility, and respecting life and nature. It may not hit the exact same classic-era peak as Disney's older animated legends, and some of the familiar Disney storytelling beats show through, including the recurring idea that ignoring elders always magically works out. But even with that, it's still well-made, sincere, and easy to recommend, especially if you're watching with kids or you enjoy myth-inspired fantasy. The comparisons to Star Wars, 1976, are hard to miss. Sure, most big, crowd-pleasing adventures ride the rails of the classic hero's journey, but this one lines up especially neatly. A restless young lead desperate to venture beyond home, authority figures pushing back, a crisis that forces action, an older mentor figure whose influence lingers after death, a flashy self-interested companion who bails and then returns at the perfect moment, and even a late story shift in how we understand the enemy. It's familiar stuff, but it works. I'll be honest, I'm clearly not the target demographic for a film like this. I'm the wrong gender and about 50 years outside the intended age bracket, yet I still had a good time with it, enough to rate it fairly highly. Right now, Disney feels like a studio operating with a cheat code. Between the endless remake, pipeline, and newer originals that instantly click with families, they're in a position where almost anything they release becomes a major event. And it's easy to imagine how Moana looked on paper in a boardroom. A kind-hearted, magically chosen, young heroine with plenty of determination, very much in line with Disney's modern streak of headstrong leads, grounded in Polynesian culture, a clear step toward broader representation, wrapped in a story that practically begs for big musical moments. You can also predict the afterlife. Kids looping the songs on repeat, parents regretting the soundtrack purchase, and a stage adaptation that feels inevitable. In a lot of ways, Moana carries familiar Disney DNA. You can feel echoes of Mulan, The Lion King, and even a post-Frozen era of mega-accessible musical storytelling. The Ocean Island setting and the addition of Dwayne Johnson as the voice of the demigod Maui help it stand apart aesthetically and tonally. But as a narrative, it rarely strays far from the reliable template. A rebellious young protagonist sets out, faces trials, grows into the role, and saves the day. That's the central frustration. It's a vibrant, well-made film that could have pushed further. Instead, it settles for being a polished, colorful adventure rather than something truly distinctive. Still, there's plenty to enjoy. The sidekicks are classic Disney fun. And yes, Hi-Hey, the wild-eyed chicken, consistently gets the biggest laughs. The musical numbers are pleasant and well-produced, even if they don't all land as instant, hummable classics. And Moana herself, voiced by Auli'i Cravalho, brings real energy and warmth. She makes the character feel alive in a way that carries scenes even when the plot is coasting. Where the film ultimately lands depends on what you want from it. If you're looking for a big, upbeat family outing, something bright, fast-moving, and crowd-friendly, it absolutely delivers. But the extra emotional punch that turns a good Disney movie into a forever Disney classic feels a little muted here, and that keeps the film from fully sticking in the memory once the credits roll and the next Disney release appears on the horizon. On the flip side, you can argue that Moana is Disney animation doing what it does best in a modern package. A confident coming-of-age adventure with large-scale spectacle, lovable characters, and a lead who has more agency than the classic princess mold ever allowed. Cravalho is excellent. She starts Moana with huge spirit and heart, then layers in growing confidence and capability as the journey unfolds, creating a satisfying arc that feels earned. Her performance sells the emotional core of the songs, especially the film's big, yearning anthem, which taps into that very specific Disney feeling of wanting more from the world. And Dwayne Johnson, he's clearly having a blast, but it's not just ego-driven swagger. Maui gets humor, flaws, and a bit of vulnerability, and Johnson leans into all of it. His comedic timing is sharp, his charisma is effortless, and his dynamic with Cravalho becomes surprisingly sweet as the cynicism gradually softens. Directors John Musker and Ron Clements keep the pacing lively, sliding between story beats and musical sequences without the film feeling bogged down. Visually, the animation is as strong as you'd expect, detailed, fluid, and playful when it wants to be, while still delivering the grand, cinematic scale Disney aims for. Final verdict. Moana is energetic, often very funny, and expertly crafted to keep kids happy and eyes dazzled. Whether it becomes a lasting classic is debatable, but as a modern Disney adventure with a charismatic lead, big spectacle, and plenty of charm, it's an easy crowd pleaser even if it doesn't always hit that deeper, stick-with-you magic. A huge chunk of this movie unfolds out on the open water, and honestly, that ends up being the most jaw-dropping part of the whole experience. The ocean isn't just a backdrop. It's rendered with so much color, texture, and personality that it practically becomes a character of its own, playfully shaping the journey as it goes. Musically, the film is stacked. The songs from Lin-Manuel Miranda, Mark Mancina, and Opetaya Fawai hit that rare sweet spot where they're instantly hummable, but also reveal who the characters are and what they're feeling. The melodies stick, the rhythms feel alive, and the writing has that classic Disney clarity where each number carries the story forward instead of slowing it down. If you like Miranda's style, this is him working comfortably at full strength. And Mancina's score is doing heavy lifting in the best way, pushing that wide-eyed adventure feeling from the opening moments, while weaving in South Pacific-inspired sounds so the whole world feels unified. I ended up watching this after seeing the sequel, and it made sense to go back to where everything began. My brother wasn't especially interested. He's the type who saves his movie-watching energy for the cinema and barely sits down for anything at home, but I was curious, and I'm glad I did it. The story draws from Polynesian mythology, with a clear amount of creative shaping, as you'd expect, and it starts on Moana's island, where she's always been pulled toward the sea. Her parents, who lead the community, keep repeating the same rule: no one ventures beyond the reef. That rule becomes a problem when the island's resources begin to fail. The fish disappear, food runs thin, and the community's future starts to look shaky. So Moana does what you know she's going to do. She heads out anyway, not just for adventure, but because the situation forces her hand. Behind the scenes, we're told the larger cause is tied to divine chaos, an impulsive theft, a stolen sacred object, and the ripple effect of a disturbed balance that's throwing nature out of harmony. Moana's mission becomes both practical and mythic. Track down the larger-than-life figure at the center of the mess, get him to help, whether he wants to or not, and set things right by restoring what was taken. What surprised me is how well it works, even when you can see the familiar story structure under the hood. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it is refreshing to see Disney leaning into a mythos that isn't the usual European fairy tale lane. It also fits the pattern Disney has always had: dig through legends and folklore, reshape them for families, and sometimes add another name to the princess lineup. But at least here, the cultural flavor, the setting, and the lore give the movie a distinct identity. When it steps away from the standard template, it's genuinely engaging. Animation-wise, it's easy to see why this film got the praise it did. 2016 was an absurdly strong year for animation, and this belongs in that conversation. The visuals feel like a technical flex, but not an empty one. Everything is designed with care. The ocean effects are stunning. The environments pop, and little details like Maui's tattoos and how they move, or the way the island feels lived in, make the world feel tactile. It's not a nonstop joke machine either. The humor is there, but it doesn't rely on trendy references to stay afloat. It leans more on character dynamics and the momentum of the adventure. The result is a story kids can follow easily, while adults can still appreciate the craft and the themes. It also seems clear the filmmakers did real homework on the cultures they were drawing inspiration from. Even if some elements are simplified or dramatized for a mainstream animated adventure, the effort shows in the tone, the design choices, and the way the film treats its setting as more than just exotic scenery. That attention gives the movie a warmth and sincerity that makes it easier to buy into the fantasy. That said, it isn't flawless. The pacing sags a bit in the middle, and the villain/antagonistic force doesn't feel fully present until later, which can make parts of the story feel like they're waiting to kick in. It's not a deal breaker. This movie functions well even without a constantly looming bad guy, but you do feel the absence sometimes. There's also a mid-film character introduction that may land differently depending on your taste. For me, that section was more hit or miss than the rest. Still, the final stretch delivers. The emotional beats land, the spectacle ramps up, and the movie earns its sense of payoff. Even choices that could have been risky, like giving a major comedic presence a big musical role or anchoring the film around a relatively fresh lead, end up working in its favor. So yes, you can point out that it follows a familiar formula and that some themes echo things Disney, and animation in general, has explored before. It's not constantly surprising, and you can predict the shape of the character arcs early on. But the execution is strong enough that those familiar pieces don't feel like a fatal flaw. Between the vibrant ocean visuals, the memorable music, the cultural texture, and the heartfelt core, it's still one of the standout animated films of its year, and a genuinely enjoyable adventure, even if you can see the blueprint. I finally sat down and watched Disney's Moana, and it landed in a really interesting place for me. Because while I can absolutely see why people adore it, I'm also realizing more and more that modern Disney/Pixar just doesn't hit me the way it used to. Back in the 90s, those studios had a special trick. They made kids' movies that adults could genuinely fall in love with, without feeling like they were settling. Movies like The Lion King and Toy Story weren't just good for their time. They became cultural landmarks. But with newer releases like Frozen and Moana, I sometimes feel like the target has shifted more firmly toward younger audiences. Maybe I'm just more cynical than I used to be, but I can't shake the feeling that these films don't always reach adults in the same way anymore. That said, even when a movie feels familiar, it can still be effective. However, it says something about the quality of the execution that despite how predictable it is, it's still able to work wonders. And that's really the story of Moana for me. The structure is recognizable. The beats are often easy to anticipate, but the craftsmanship is strong enough that the journey still works. Visually, it's one of Disney's best-looking animated films in years. The movie drops you straight into a world of endless ocean blues, glowing sunsets, lush islands, and cultural detail, and it never lets up. The animation isn't just pretty, it's expressive. The ocean, in particular, feels like an actual character rather than a backdrop, nudging Moana forward, reacting to her, and adding warmth to scenes that could have been purely mechanical. One of the most refreshing choices is that this isn't a romance-driven story. Moana's arc is about identity, courage, and leadership, and it's grounded in a very real internal tug-of-war, doing what's expected versus following what feels true. That tension gives the adventure a more personal core than a lot of similar animated quests. The emotional center of the film is Moana's relationship with her family, especially Grandma Tala, who acts as the heart and spirit of the story. Tala scenes are where the movie slows down and breathes, and those quieter moments carry more weight than the bigger action set pieces. Her encouragement feels genuine, and the film handles Moana's sense of duty with more sincerity than I expected from a mainstream animated musical. Then there's Maui, voiced by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who honestly surprised me. I wasn't totally convinced he'd fit, but he brings a fun mix of swagger and insecurity that makes Maui entertaining without feeling one note. He's loud, funny, kind of ridiculous, and still oddly sympathetic once the story digs into why he acts the way he does. His journey toward humility pairs well with Moana's growth, and their dynamic feels like a partnership that develops naturally rather than something the script forces into place. Now, where I'm more mixed is the music. The songs are polished and functional, and they absolutely help tell the story. But I kept thinking about how Disney used to create soundtracks that felt legendary.